Welcome to Proudly Out of Line. I'm Mardi Moore, an old school dyke and the CEO of Boulder-based Rocky Mountain Equality. With everything going on around us in this world right now, it's the perfect time for all of us to be engaged, informed, and hopefully have a little fun along the way. On with the show. So glad to be on another episode of Proudly Out of Line. My colleague and friend, District Attorney Michael Dougherty, is joining us today for what I think will be a fun, educational, and inspiring conversation. Michael, thanks for joining.
Oh, Marty, thank you for having me on. And it's truly my honor and a real highlight for me to be on with you today. And I think the world of you. So thank you for allowing me to join you for today's show.
Thank you. You're such a big deal. I'm so glad to know you. And I know you don't think you're a big deal, but in the community we do. And so, you do a great job. I've never found you to be egocentric, which I struggle with myself. But I'm always so impressed by the fact that you just always celebrate the team and the people you work with and the community, which is a mark of a really great leader. And one of the things that recently I was able to join your staff retreat, and I had no idea how large the district attorney's office is, your office is. Can you talk about some of the different departments and some of the stuff you have going on in Boulder that's so unique to what's happening across the state?
Well, first, I just want to recognize that you're right. I don't think I'm a big deal. And I think part of being a success as a prosecutor and district attorney and leader is recognizing that we should always be humble and none of us are perfect. And to the extent we've had any success as an office, it's been because of two things. First, the community partnerships we formed, including with you and other leaders throughout Boulder County and beyond. So much of the success we've had and the positive change we've been able to bring, not only in the justice system, but in the community, is because of those partnerships with you and Rocky Mountain Equality and other leaders, and the amazing people I work with in the DA's office. So we have, including our volunteers, we have about 120 people on staff in the DA's office, ranging from prosecutors to district attorney investigators, victim advocates, non-legal staff, and the list goes on. But I was so thankful to you for coming to talk at the DA retreat. We do an annual retreat where all the staff come together and we ground ourselves in our mission and our purpose. And we talk about some of the things that have happened over the past year. So having you as the guest speaker there was incredibly inspiring and important to me and to our office. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. You talk about prosecuting. So I've seen you in a lot of places. I've never been in the courtroom when you prosecuted. And this morning, as I was thinking about getting to have a conversation with you, I have a memory of your work in New York, which is probably where you first prosecuted a case.
Yes.
Do you remember the first case you prosecuted?
I remember the first case I tried.
Okay.
Actually, there are two stories that I'll tell. The first is during law school, I was an intern for the public defender's office. So the first trial I had was actually as an intern for a public defender's office. And this is an amazing story that I don't ever talk about. But I was sitting there at counsel table with this young defendant. His name was Justin. And my supervisor, Gordon, much older guy, really big guy. And he's sitting next to me. And they're about to bring in the prospective jurors for jury selection. And Gordon turns to me and says, "Someday you're going to thank me for this." And I look and I say, "For what?" And Gordon got up and left the courtroom, leaving me and Justin to fare for ourselves. The only person who looked more nervous, scared, and out of place than me was Justin, because he realized he had me representing him. But thankfully, that trial went well, and Justin was acquitted and was able to go on with his life. Ultimately, I became a prosecutor at the Manhattan DA's office and moved back to New York City to work for the Manhattan DA's office. And I was incredibly honored to work in that office. That office taught me what it means to stand and fight for justice every day, and to do the right thing, not to rack up convictions like notches in a gun belt, but to always seek the right outcome in every case. And my first trial at the Manhattan DA's office involved a UPS driver who was stealing high-end, high-value packages off the back of the truck during his shift. And the reason I was given that trial fairly early on in my time at the Manhattan DA's office was my supervisor knew that I loaded trucks for UPS when I was putting myself through community college. So with that tenuous connection, he gave me the UPS case. And that was the first of many, many cases I've tried in my career.
Well, something else we have in common. I worked for UPS. I was the little gopher during the holidays running packages to doors. And I was bitten by a dog named Stubby, who apparently wasn't supposed to bite. But that was the end of my career at UPS. But
I'm sorry to laugh. That was like a dramatic and rough story.
It was kind of a funny story. I think my memory tells me that you prosecuted a hate crime in New York City also. Can you talk about that case?
Sure. So in 2000, New York State passed a hate crimes law. And with that came the ability of prosecutors to bring hate crimes charges against individuals who committed crimes based on hate and bias against protected groups. So as it turned out, almost immediately thereafter, I had a case come into the DA's office that I was asked to take on. And it was a individual who was fairly intoxicated walking down the street on a beautiful Saturday. And he came across a rabbi outside a temple and started harassing the rabbi, making religious and ethnic slurs at the rabbi. And the interesting legal issue in the case was because of what happened next. So he'd already trespassed on the temple property and was harassing the rabbi and threatening him. But a good Samaritan came along and said to the defendant, you know, it's a beautiful day. Why don't you just go on your way? What are you doing? And the defendant, instead of walking off, smashed the Good Samaritan in the face with a beer bottle that he'd actually been holding in his hand, caused a tremendous amount of injury and damage and trauma to the victim. That victim turned out to also be Jewish. So the interesting legal issue was the hate crime not only against the rabbi and the temple, but also against the Good Samaritan. Ultimately, the defendant pled guilty. We were able to secure the right outcome in that case, and that was the first hate crimes case that the Manhattan DA's office handled, and I was proud to have handled that case.
I had remembered that. Thanks for all that work. You see so much. One of the things that I wonder about you, and you cross my mind often because you do so much important work, is, and since I've been in Boulder 12 years, I just celebrated my 12-year anniversary at Rocky Mountain Equality, and in 12 years, there's been a lot of horrific things that have happened, well, across the world, and in Boulder County. And I think about the King Soopers murders. I think about the attack on the Jewish people in front of the courthouse. I think about the Marshall Fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I read the paper and I'm a bit traumatized. But you're meeting with victims and you're meeting with, I don't know what the language is. I'm no lawyer, the assailant, the person that we're going after for this harm. How do you manage that? Like, how do you manage being in the cesspool of hate and stay focused and come out on the other side, the Michael Doherty that we love and admire? I don't know how one does that.
Well, time and time again, I've been entrusted to lead through crises in Colorado and also in New York. And first and foremost, I recognize the tremendous responsibility that is entrusted in me and our team at the DA's office. We can only meet that responsibility if we stay focused on justice and doing the right thing and doing our jobs. So that's part of it. The other part of it is I always look at the response we have as a community to each one of those horrific incidents. And I take such heart and hope from that response. It doesn't minimize the incredible horrific crime that's been committed or the damage that's been inflicted on victims, their families, and the community. But I also look at the response not just by first responders, but by the community. And can I tell you one quick story
Please.
as an example? So I, of course, often think about the mass murder of King Soopers. I think about it all the time. But what I really choose to focus on is the response by Boulder police that day, and they saved tens upon tens of lives. There were over 100 people hiding in the store when Boulder PD went in. But then also the community response all throughout. So here's the story. There was a young boy outside the Boulder Police Department a day after the shooting took place, after 10 of our community members were gunned down. And the young boy had a sign, and I went over to him and introduced myself, and his name is Gil. And then Gil would periodically show up at different police department events, and he's, in 5th grade at the time. And I would see Gil at different points. And then fast forward to the trial, and I handled, as you know, the trial against the King Soopers shooter. And we have this large training room in the DA's office. You've been there, Marty, for some of our trainings put on by Rocky Mountain Equality. And we were inviting victim families and their loved ones to gather in that training room before court, during the lunch break, and after court, so we can answer any questions and support them throughout. So picture 70 or 80 people in that training room. And the first day of the trial, I gave the opening statement, and I go into the training room, and I see something you don't usually see in government and public service, which is this long buffet of food set up alongside during the lunch break. And I say to Shannon, the woman I work with closely in the office, I said, "Where's the food from?" She said, "Oh, it's from the West End." And with tears welling in her eyes, she said, I think we have food from restaurants and from King Soopers for every day of the trial. So every day I'd come in during the lunch break and I'd say, who's the food from today? And it's Abo's, Cosmos, list goes on, Jack's, the Post. And then one day I come in and I see the buffet and I say to Shannon, who's the food from today? She said, Gil. I said, the boy. Yes. He had opened a lemonade stand next to a food truck and sold lemonade so he could raise enough money to buy food for those 70 to 80 people for one day of the trial. That's what I focus on, because that's who we are as a community. So yes, I had to prosecute the case, and yes, I was honored to be on the trial team that ultimately had the defendant found guilty on all charges and sentenced to the maximum allowed under the law. But the part I really focus on is community response. That's how I maintain a positive outlook while also remaining absolutely committed to fighting for a better future for Gil and everyone in this community.
Thank you for sharing that story. I have tears in my eyes. I'm sorry I don't know Gil.
You'll meet him at some point. He's very active in the community, and it's people like him that give me such hope for the future.
Yeah, that is a hopeful story. We need more hopeful stories. Question that I have for you is, your wife's kind of a badass. I think I can say that online. And Antonia, who has, you two are quite the match in terms of thinking about law, legal aspects. Did you meet her here, or where did you meet Antonia?
So we met at the Manhattan District Attorney's office. Antonia and I were both in the trial division in that office, and we actually knew each other for a couple of years before we started talking, got to know one another better. In fact, we were both in downtown Manhattan on 9/11 and working at the Manhattan DA's office. And in the weeks that followed, there was obviously devastation. And also our work was disrupted because the New York City Police Department was still responding to the rescue and recovery operations. So Antonia and I and a group of people went out to lunch one day, which I would never have done on a regular work day. And we went out to lunch, and I remember we were leaving the restaurant. I turned to my friend Tyrone, and I said, who's really a really cool person is Antonia. And he looked at me, he's like, you cannot date someone in our trial division. I was like, I am not going to, why do you say? I'm just saying she seems great. Mm-hmm. And a few weeks later, we started dating, and then we went on to get engaged and married, and now we have wonderful kids as well. And I'm really lucky because she continues to be a force for good and helps support me in all the work that I do, not only as district attorney, but also in running for attorney general.
Yeah. My encounters with her have always been, she's always impressed me. Her understanding of the law, her ability to work through systems. So she got lucky with you, and you got lucky with her.
Oh, I think the luck was all on my side. I think anybody who knows the two of us knows that I got the better end of that deal.
Luck makes me think of the Irish. Mm-hmm. And I believe you're Irish. As I watch your Facebook feed and your connection and the last name Dougherty. Are you first generation American?
So my grandparents, all four of them, came over on the boat with nothing but the shirts on their backs and from Ireland, and they settled in Brooklyn, New York, which is where I was born. And from them, I learned how important it is to work incredibly hard, to love one's family, but also to love this country and to do everything I can to fight for this country. But my grandparents, they came here, and in a lot of ways, it's the embodiment of the American dream that I sit with you today, Marty, less than 100 years later. And I'm the elected district attorney, and I'm running for attorney general. And to me, that those freedoms and opportunities that brought my grandparents here are what are denied to so many now. My grandparents left behind their families in Ireland. In fact, as a result, my parents' first cousins are all still back in Ireland. So if you follow me on Facebook, as I know you do, you'll see Dougherty weighing in with positive comments, and they spell the name differently. Because when my grandfather came over on the boat, they changed it from Doherty to, for some reason, the longer spelling that I have. But you'll see them, and we have a lot of contact still between weddings and funerals and so on. There's a lot of transatlantic traffic back and forth.
When was the last time you were in Ireland?
2 years ago, we took our kids there.
Was that their first trip to Ireland?
Their first trip, yes.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
That's great. So you're also, when I think, oh, I'm tired, I think, well, Michael's not tired, and or at least you don't appear tired. How do you manage that? Like, you're a big runner. Is that how you keep your adrenaline up, or what's your big connection to running?
So I've always loved being in the outdoors and played sports all through school. And then actually after 9/11, a friend clued me into these 24-hour adventure races, which were crazy, but really amazing to participate in. And then Antonia, that friend, and I would do them, these 3-person teams that we had. And you do running, kayaking, biking, rappelling for 24 hours. And then as time went on, I realized I just really want to put on my shoes and go for a run. And I just started running longer and longer and longer. So I did a 50 miler in the Northeast before we moved to Colorado. And then we would come out to Colorado to do different races. So I came out here to do the Pikes Peak Marathon. And Tony and I did a 24-hour relay in Fraser, Colorado. And every time we were back at DIA, looking at one another saying, why are we going back to New York? Like, this is where we want to be. And ultimately, I moved out here to work for, as you know, the Attorney General's office. But since then, I've continued to do ultras and really fortunate to have done the Leadville 100 a couple times and then 50 milers all around the state of Colorado.
You've been traveling a lot. Have you found a new favorite run?
Oh, good question. Boulder has such amazing runs,
Yeah.
so I'm spoiled,
Yeah.
obviously. So I've been in Durango. Durango has some great places to run. I was also down in Ouray. Ouray has these beautiful trails that go all around the town. Colorado is just an incredible place to be a trail runner, and I'm going to run until I can no longer move.
I love that. I was thinking about Ouray and Pagosa Springs today, thinking about the fact that the Colorado River is up for debate on who gets rights to the water and what that looks like for the state of Colorado and others around us. And I think about how much science doesn't matter anymore to people. And I can just hear people saying that, the flooding, we have plenty of water. What's the fight about? I mean, just the idiocracy of how people's minds work. Can you talk a little bit about, was this an infrastructure issue? I know it was a lot of rain, but is it an infrastructure issue? And then add on what you're thinking about the Colorado Compact, which is up for renegotiation soon.
Well, we face two things in Colorado and across the United States and throughout the world, of course. One is climate change and having these climate disasters. And we've seen that in Boulder County with the Marshall Fire, and recognizing that that's only going to continue. As part of climate change, we also have a scarcity of water, which is impacting the Colorado River and other rivers and waterways. So as you highlighted, the Colorado River Compact ends in 2026, and the Attorney General's office is directly involved in the negotiations, but also any litigation that comes as a result of that. And although the Colorado River carries our name, Colorado, it's not just Colorado's water. So we share the water from that river with 6 other states and also with tribes. And the River Compact was designed to make sure there was a fair apportionment of the water. And now it's become more difficult over time, not only because the compact is ending, but because the water supply has changed. So there's a lot of legal issues and disagreements brewing between Upper Basin and Lower Basin states. And the AG has a central role in that, so I've been very focused on it. But also when it comes to water, one of the things that I'm concerned about are private equity companies trying to buy up Colorado's water. So it happened years ago in Alamosa in the San Luis Valley, and now it's happening on the western slope out by Grand Junction in Mesa County. And I want to make sure that Colorado's water is protected for our ranchers and our farmers and for everybody who enjoys the beautiful outdoors here in Colorado. I think one of the things we can do is also help change the law to recognize that right now, for ranchers and farmers, it's basically a use it or lose it. If you have water rights and you don't use it to its entirety, you could go on a list and then you end up losing your water rights. We should change that to allow people to be able to share water, conserve water, and also use the best possible technology to do both of those things.
I appreciate that. I grew up in southeastern Colorado,
Right.
and in the 70s, Colorado Springs and some other municipalities came down and bought all of our water, and the farmers all went broke. And it's dry land down there.
Right.
Where I grew up was the Dust Bowl, and like buying that water and taking it out when farmers weren't making any money. It's like, well, I can either send my kids to college by selling this water, or I can keep farming and making no money. It's a really tough choice. I think here in Boulder County, a friend of mine bought a property in Hygiene that has water rights, and it's all and we have water running behind a farmer's ditch running behind the Equality Center of the Rocky Mountains, and there's the ditch riders that nobody even seems to know who they are. As you were just describing the story, use it or lose it. Like, who's keeping track of use it or lose it? Is it some ditch rider who's not marking records? Like, how does the intricacy of that work?
So there's actually a governmental entity that's responsible for tracking the use of water and water rights. And then there's a process whereby someone can end up on a list, the abandonment list. And if they're on that list for more than 10 years, they lose their rights to the water.
Thank you. I'll quit yelling at the ditch rider then. Maybe it's not him. You and I met around hate crimes.
Yes.
And in that is when I gained just great respect for you and realized you were a trustworthy guy. And I think you figured out the same of me.
Definitely.
And working together on that. There have been, now with the change in the federal government, they're no longer tracking gender identity in some forms of whether, for hate crimes. And they just keep trying to remove the trans community in particular with impacts on gays, lesbians, and bisexual and queer people. But I think you've done something unique and in setting up the bias hate crime phone number. One of the issues that I was having when we first met is police weren't, well, one, the community didn't trust the police or the sheriff or you or anybody else.
Right.
The other is that the police didn't seem to understand that they had a job to protect us, which was where I was kind of angry.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the roles that I think you have and that I count on you having, so if you don't have it, please get the role, is keeping the police accountable.
Right.
Can you talk about that and how that works?
Sure. Well, first, I want to recognize the leadership that you brought to this issue. I mean, it's because of you, Marty, that we launched the Hate Crimes Initiative for Boulder County. And as you know, that's now been replicated by other police agencies and district attorneys' offices around the metro area. And that was long overdue, and the concerns and questions you had then were valid, and they still are to some degree, quite frankly. So we still have more work to do. But as part of that, we launched trainings for law enforcement and prosecutors. We developed a strong working relationship. In fact, when you just talked about the federal government no longer including gender identity on their hate crime statistics and tracking, Rocky Mountain Equality and my office released a joint statement protesting against that. And we both have been very outspoken about the misdirection that the federal government's taking in regards to the LGBTQ plus community, particularly our trans community members. And we'll continue to do that work. And I really appreciate the work we're doing on hate crimes. The work we've done on hate crimes has been largely supported, if not entirely supported, by law enforcement leaders in Boulder County. That's really important because when you think about how we train the rank and file, it's one thing for the sheriff, Sheriff Pelly, and now Sheriff Johnson, or the police chiefs to agree. It's another thing to make sure the officers and deputies who are out there on patrol are treating people with respect and have the rapport, and they're able to earn the trust of the people they're working with, the victims and witnesses, so they could determine if a hate crime took place or not. And that they understand we're not going to tolerate that in Boulder County, ever. And that those are some of our most serious offenses because they cut against who we are as a people. In terms of holding police accountable, that's something I've been really focused on throughout my entire career because no one is above the law. So I've had to prosecute police officers and sheriff's deputies throughout my career, including here in Boulder County. So, for example, as we have this conversation, there are 2 sheriff's deputies who are in state prison because their misconduct resulted in the death of a young man named Demetrius. And my office handled that case. That case went to trial. They were both convicted and sentenced to state prison. I handled a case in which a black man was in the Boulder County jail. He was restrained, and after being restrained, was tased by a sergeant on duty. It was just a terrible assault. And I prosecuted that case. I tried that case myself because I think it's important to do that. And he was convicted as well. One thing I want to highlight, though, in each one of those cases and the other cases we brought against law enforcement, the law enforcement leaders were supportive of each one of those prosecutions. Not necessarily the rank and file. There were some difficult moments along the way, quite frankly, but the sheriff on the cases I just referenced, was Sheriff Joe Pelly at the time. He was entirely supportive, and he demanded that his entire agency cooperate with the investigation. Again, there were some issues with the rank and file along the way, but to me, it's a testament to those leaders, and in those cases, it was Joe Pelly, but that they've supported our office taking action anytime an officer or deputy engages in misconduct, because first of all, it's the wrong thing to do and no one's above the law. Second of all, it raises the performance and conduct of other law enforcement officers if they know that those laws are going to be enforced by the district attorney's office, and I will remain dedicated to doing exactly that.
Thank you. That helps me sleep better at night all the time, knowing that. And thanks for those examples. I'm going to wade into some water that I haven't waded into publicly with you, and feel free to not answer. Um,
It's quite the build up to this question,
yeah,
by the
well,
way.
it's a tough one for me, and it's something that I'm strategizing in my mind, and really haven't voiced, but to a handful, small handful of people. After the murder of George Floyd, um, in Boulder, the Boulder Valley School District, and we signed on to the letter then
Mm.
to remove SROs from the school resource officers, police in schools, from the schools. And I'm a parent. My kids are older, but I'm a grandparent
Right.
now. And, I think about that. And I think the way there's too many guns in the world and people who have the guns aren't responsible gun owners, the violence that we see in the cities. Um, and I'm rethinking where I'm at after the Evergreen shooting in Jeffco. And then the false alarm, thank God, false alarm in Boulder 2 days later. And I'm curious of your opinion of SROs.
Well, I appreciate the question. It's certainly timely given the tragic incident at Evergreen High School, and we see too many of these incidents around the United States. And I think it's a fear that every parent and grandparent has anytime their kids are going to school. And I worry about the trauma that all of our kids are going through with these lockdown drills and these false alarms, and let alone when a shooting actually takes place. I mean, I grew up in a high school where it's not unusual to have fistfights, but I never for a moment thought someone was going to have a gun in the hallway of the school. And that's the sad reality that I worry about. What does that do to the mental health in the future for those kids? Boulder Valley School District and Denver are the only two school districts that I'm aware of in Colorado that do not have SROs in the schools. And it's interesting in Boulder County as district attorney because St. Vrain Valley School District has SROs and they're really proud of and grateful for the SRO program they have. What I would want to see us have is enough security in the schools without having the school to prison pipeline. And that is a legitimate, valid concern that drove you and others to ask that the SROs be removed from Boulder Valley School District. What we should have, from my perspective, are specially trained and selected officers who are working with the schools, not just in the schools. And that's where I think the system is broken down. If you have a police officer who's wearing a uniform and the officer's walking around the halls of the school and their only option is to issue a ticket or make an arrest, and they're not directly involved in the school and the administration of the school, I think that's where we see these issues happen. Where you have a fight in a school and a teacher yells for the police officer to come over. If the police officer is not an active part of the school administration, then the options for that officer are, was a criminal offense committed? Yes, it was an assault. Okay, this person's going to get charged with a crime. That can't be how the process works. I want to see that we have SROs that have the trust and communication with the kids. It's also how SROs learn about sex assaults that have happened in the schools, different threats that might be brewing, different gang disputes that are starting to hit a boiling point. That communication makes the whole school safer. So it's not just to me around school shootings, it's also around just everyday things that kids face. So I'm in favor of having police officers within the schools, but only if we have a training program where they want to be in it, they're specially selected and trained for it, and then they have a closer working relationship with schools, and I think that's where the system needs to be improved institutionally.
Thank you for that really thoughtful response. I needed that. I needed that thought in my head.
And I will just say, to your point, about a year and a half ago, it was a winter day, the snow was coming down, there was a false alarm at Boulder High. And the caller had, and it wasn't just Boulder High, it was high schools around the country, replicated the sound of gunfire while calling 911. So it sounded all too real to the 911 dispatchers. So I and district attorney investigators rushed out of our office and went to Boulder High School, along with an incredibly strong response by the Boulder Police Department, of course. And I appreciate how quickly they got there. There was no SRO in the school to say, there's no gunfire here. This is likely a hoax, a prank. And I was standing there as the snow is falling, thinking, I wonder if there was an SRO in the school, would we know sooner what's actually happening inside that school or not? That's the kind of situation where I really value having some presence, law enforcement presence inside the school, but only so far is that we're not over criminalizing high school behavior. Coming from a school district where we had a whole bunch of people, my friends included, who would have been arrested for fist fights and stupid stuff that teens do, I'm really mindful, especially when you think about communities of color, that school to prison pipeline. We cannot allow that to happen.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been on my mind because we're working with a student who is in a local high school and being extremely bullied. There was a crime that actually happened. There's undocumented status wrapped up in on both sides of it, and the person is afraid to report for all those reasons. And one of the things that you taught me early on is when these immigration laws from the feds start interrupting states' rights around how we treat people in our community, that reports go down and that the whole community becomes unsafe. And I'm seeing that. I had lunch with Chief Redfern 2 weeks ago, and that day ICE had shown up at a North Boulder trailer park.
Right.
Not telling anybody in town, you, the police, the sheriff, anybody that's coming. Somebody from the trailer park called and said, "There's a guy down on the ground. Please come." That is unsafe. The police showed up with guns to try to protect the community, and they're protecting, and they couldn't do anything because it was ICE. What is going on in our community right now?
Well, it's a scary time. Immigrants in the community are absolutely terrified, and not just immigrants who don't have legal status. I'm often asked by people who emigrated to the United States who are in the country legally, but they have fear because they have black or brown skin, and they're worried they're going to get swooped up by ICE. Yeah. That is crazy and scary. And they'll ask me, what document is best for me to carry on my person? What should I have a copy of on my person so that I can show something to ICE so they don't actually take me to a detention center? That's the terrifying reality that's been created by ICE wearing masks, which should never happen because it undermines the confidence and trust that people have in law enforcement. And as you know, Marty, I've worked with outstanding women and men in law enforcement for nearly 30 years. King Soopers, the Pearl Street firebombing, the list of cases goes on, but in none of those cases did law enforcement feel the need to wear a mask. Right. So ICE wearing a mask is absolutely terrifying to people. I also want to just say loud and clear, private prisons should be banned in the United States. We should not have any for-profit corporation running private prisons where they have every incentive to put money back in their pocket instead of in the care and custody of those that they're responsible for. So with ICE, one of the things we've been doing as an office, as you know, is know your rights trainings. And if there are community members, businesses, restaurants, you name it, that want to know your rights training, they can reach out to our office. We do them. And there are some really practical steps that we can offer to people because Colorado actually has a lot of protections in place under the law. And in many ways, we are a beacon to other states in immigrant protection. But the only way those laws work are first, if people are aware of their rights and protections, and then second, that they're enforced. So, for example, local and state law enforcement cannot cooperate with ICE. So there was a Mesa County Sheriff's deputy who recently pulled over a young woman who was traveling through Colorado on I-70, and he conspired through text messages with ICE so that when he released her from the traffic stop, the sheriff's deputy released her, she was pulled over by ICE a few miles down the road and taken into custody. That violates the law that passed under Senate Bill 276, which I strongly supported and testified in support of. And I'm grateful to Attorney General Phil Weiser, who I know you just had on the show, because Phil and his team brought a lawsuit against the Mesa County Sheriff's deputy. And that's how we protect the law and protect immigrants in our communities, by making sure the state laws are enforced and people are held accountable. So I think what's really difficult for people right now is if someone's a victim of domestic violence, that person should be able to go to the hospital for treatment, call the police if they want, and come to the Justice Center so we can hold the offender fully accountable. But with this amount of terror and fear in the community, people are afraid to get treatment for their injuries, call 911, and come to the Justice Center. That's why we've ramped up our Know Your Rights trainings. We've been doing them as part of my immigrant protection program since 2018. But we've been doing more and more of them just to try to get the word out that in Boulder County, we're going to fight for them and keep them safe, and we want them to come forward when they're victims of crime.
Thanks for doing that work. I have hope that the rule of law will be maintained in the United States. Hope. I don't feel like I have a lot of confidence in that as we're talking about ICE coming into communities and just the number of lawsuits that this federal administration is causing because they're breaking the law, and then the
Right.
law is a slow process. I don't know how you have patience for what you do because I am such an impatient person. Um, do you? So I. Why are you running for attorney general? And do you think attorney generals, which is all kind of we have left, because they've appointed the MAGA people have appointed all these federal judges. Like, I am afraid, confused, and wonder where it all stops.
The rule of law is the only thing we have protecting our democracy, and the fight is on. And that's why I'm running for attorney general. I've had the honor of standing in court for the last 30 years saying I'm here on behalf of the people. And that experience matters a lot when it comes to taking on the federal government. You're going to take Donald Trump to court. It can't be your first time walking into a courtroom, that's for sure. So for me, it's a matter of doing what I've done throughout my career, standing and fighting for justice. And you're right, Marty, that the rule of law is the only thing even slowing the Trump administration down. So you look, for example, the U.S. military. Well, let me back up one step. The U.S. military should never police American cities. That should not, cannot, must not happen. The only thing stopping that from happening, because it's a blatantly unconstitutional action, are the attorneys general from different states bringing lawsuits to stop the Trump administration from doing exactly that. And I would highlight for your listeners that in each one of those cases thus far, the federal judges have agreed it's a constitutional violation. And yet the Trump administration continues to do so. But the rule of law is the only thing slowing them down. And I think that's the key to preserving our democracy and building a better future for Colorado and the rest of the country, is making sure that the rule of law stands strong. And some of the federal judges who've ruled against Trump on immigration or the U.S. military policing our streets are Trump appointees, or even on the immigration issue, appointee by Ronald Reagan, who in his decision said he's been on the bench for 4 decades and never seen something as blatantly unconstitutional as the revocation of birthright citizenship. So when it comes to the rule of law in our democracy, to me, and I know I'm a lawyer, so I might be a little biased here, but I really see the rule of law being the only thing that's protecting our democracy.
I do too, but what does that mean for us in community who can't protect the rule of law? That's your job. But what about the listeners? I get asked all the time, what should I be doing? Like, what do I do? And now there's a debate on whether we should show up and protest and on No King's Day, or whether we should just be writing postcards to people. And so we don't have one leader against what's happening. But when people ask you, what should I be doing? What do you tell them?
So great question, and I'm so glad you asked, because I think people understandably feel overwhelmed and powerless right now. And quite frankly, that's what they want you to feel. And in response to that, we have to stand and be heard and fight. And we could do that in a couple different ways, and I really encourage your listeners to do it. One is showing up. So you mentioned the No Kings rally. I hope we have even more than the thousands of people who came out when we did it the first time, because those protests make a difference. And I'll give you one example of where public outcry has made a difference. So as you know, in trying to pass that tax bill, the Republicans were going to sell off public lands, of which, by the way, Colorado is made up of 35% federal public lands. It was the public outcry that got that stripped from the bill. Not just Democrats, but also Republicans and unaffiliated, all speaking up and saying, you can never sell off our public lands for profit. That cannot happen. So we should never underestimate the power of the people. That still exists, and it's a core value and function of who we are as an American people. The other thing I always urge people to do is support nonprofits. And I know you aren't asking or expecting me to say this, but Rocky Mountain Equality is one I always mention.
Thank you.
El Comité de Longmont, I always mention. Remain, which is an acronym. It's actually RMIAN for your listeners. They provide support for immigrants. Because right now, 2 things are happening to nonprofits. First, they're being overwhelmed with requests for help and assistance, particularly ones who are helping immigrants in our community. So if your listeners have the opportunity to contribute money this year and they're trying to make a decision about where to send it, I would really encourage people to think about what values are being threatened by the Trump administration and to push funding and support to those kinds of nonprofits. The other thing that's happening is federal grants are being cut off for nonprofit organizations like Rocky Mountain Equality. We even have, in my office, we have 3 of our victim advocates who worked on King Soopers with me. They're funded through federal grants, and those federal grants are now being threatened. So we're not a nonprofit. I'm not asking people to send funding to the DA's office, and we have a plan in place for our office. But point being, nonprofits like Rocky Mountain Equality, El Comité, the list goes on. Those are in danger right now and more needed than ever. So for those two reasons, I hope listeners will support as much as they possibly can. Can I add one thing, though?
Please.
You say you're impatient.
Mm-hmm.
I would highlight that we met in 2018 in a small storefront in Longmont, which is where then Boulder was housed. And I'm sitting in this beautiful Equality Center of the Rocky Mountains because of you and your leadership. And that took years to make it happen. So you've always been in the fight. You've been a fighter for the community every day. And you describe yourself as impatient, but you've made a difference over the long haul.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep that perspective as my feet jiggle. I'm like, what should I be doing next? We're getting close to the end of our time with you because you've got another busy day ahead of you, and I appreciate all that you do for our community. There's one last heavy question I want to ask before I have a couple of fun ones.
Sure.
So one of the detectives at Boulder Police, a friend of mine, became a friend of mine, out gay man, had all the heavy stuff, including all the sexual assault. There's a lot of sexual assault that happens in Boulder County, across the country, let's be clear, but I'm specific to what your current role is. Those cases are really hard. And, I read the paper. That's, what you're supposed to do and keep track of what's going on in the society around you. How do you do prevention around sexual assault? Like, what's your team doing so these things are not happening?
Well, as you know, I specialized in sex crimes prosecutions when I was in the Manhattan DA's office. I became the deputy chief of the sex crimes unit, overseeing 50 prosecutors working sex crimes cases, and they're incredibly difficult and challenging cases. And you find a lot of fulfillment in fighting for justice for victims in those cases. And we need to continue doing more on the prevention side as well. I will say, when you say you read the paper, that's actually an undercount of how many people are being sexually assaulted for two reasons. First, you know that so few people come forward after they've been sexually assaulted, and that's why we've built such a strong support system in Boulder County between law enforcement and our office and advocates in the community. But also, and I appreciate this about the media, but it leads to people having the wrong impression about sex assaults, is that if a defendant has the same last name as a victim, so father sexually assaults daughter or grandfather sexually assaults grandkid, the news will not report on it because they don't want anybody to realize the identity of the victim. Oh. So we have hundreds and hundreds of cases every year that are not reported on by the media. And again, I appreciate that. And the Daily Camera will actually reach out to us and say, is there a familial connection here? We don't want to reveal the identity of the victim. That's how it should work. Wow. And yet organizations like Blue Sky Bridge, which does a tremendous amount of prevention, education in Boulder County, we're lucky to have them. No one realizes how frequently they're used by people who've been sexually assaulted and abused as kids because so few of those cases are reported on. So on the prevention side, it's doing what Blue Sky Bridge does, which is getting out in schools. A lot of what happens with sex assaults is through grooming and manipulation. So helping people recognize those signals in advance of an actual sex assault, and then knowing that they can report it and how many resources we have in place. Making sure, for example, that people are aware. In Colorado, we passed a law recently that victims can go to the hospital for medical treatment after they've been sexually assaulted and still not have to report it to the police. And that allows them to get the treatment they need, the support. Also, evidence can be collected. There are a lot of protections under the law in Colorado, but we need to do more on the prevention side. Sex assault in our country happens all too often, and it impacts thousands and thousands of people every year.
Thank you. I didn't realize that piece about your career in Manhattan. Thanks for sharing that. So I think I already said I was a grandmother. You're a father. You have twins. Are there twins in your family? Whose side of the family has twins?
So my aunt and uncle are twins, but they were 2 of 11. So I don't know if you have 11 kids, you're eventually just going to have twins. So I don't know if I could say it runs in the family or just, against the odds you have twins if you have 11 kids. But those are the twins in our family.
Yeah, you just got lucky again, right?
Yes.
That's great. You're fit. You work all the time. What do you eat, Michael? This is a serious question.
Oh, really?
Yes, it is. I worry about your health.
Oh, this is going in a different direction
We're going to try
than
to
I
wrap this up,
anticipated.
and I want to leave you whole because we've been down some heavy roads.
I appreciate that. I eat well. I've never had a lack of appetite, and I have people at work and at home who are very focused on making sure I continue to do exactly that.
Good.
Plus, I'm a runner, and as your listeners know, if they're runners or cyclists, whatever they might be, you need fuel to keep going.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm
Well,
taking
good.
care of myself. Don't
Okay,
worry.
good. I asked Joe Nagus the same question because I'm like, Joe, I don't know when you ever eat. I've seen
Right.
you eating once in 12 years, Michael. So just making sure that's covered. The other fun thing one of the things I don't know about you is, do you listen to music? And if so, what do you listen to?
So this is a funny question because people don't believe me when I give the answer. But when I run, I usually listen to hip hop. And I'm a big fan of hip hop, actually. But I tend to like all music, not my
Hip hop.
thing. Yeah, hip hop when I'm
Hip-hop.
running. And then otherwise, I like all kinds of music.
You strike me as a reader,
hmm
lawyer, but do you read anything for fun? Is there anything what are you reading right now?
So I just started reading a book by JFK on immigration. Someone gave it to me as a gift on the campaign trail while running for attorney general. Someone gave me the JFK book, and so I just started reading that. But I do try to rotate between one fiction and one nonfiction book. So most recently, I read The Stand, which was incredible, and I didn't realize that Boulder would be featured so prominently in The Stand. But so it was a great read, and obviously just scary too.
Yeah.
But it's a great distraction.
Do you listen to podcasts?
Yes. Well, and I would encourage people to listen to this podcast.
Well, I would
'cause it's
too,
been great.
because we've been proudly out of line. But I listen to a couple. Like one that I listen to religiously is Sisters-in-Law with
Okay.
Joyce
Right.
and the whole team. What do you listen to?
So a couple that I'm a big fan of. One is Left, Right, and Center, which comes out every Friday, and it's what it sounds like, a really balanced show about the news and politics. And you have the left, right, and center represented, and they don't talk over one another, and they give good, long answers to questions. And I'm often learning from listening to the three of them and may agree with either one of them on any particular
Right.
issue. Also, I'm a big fan of the Rewatchables, which is a podcast about movies that if the movie were on the TV, you would stay and you'd say, I got to watch this. So it's something you've seen before, but it's worth rewatching.
Mhm.
And they go through funny categories like who else could have played the lead, what moment could never be repeated now, like an off-color joke from years ago, that kind of thing. So, for example, they're doing Robert Redford month since he passed. So this morning while running, I was listening to The Sting, the podcast about The Sting. But the Rewatchables is a favorite of mine as well.
I love that soundtrack from The Sting.
Yes.
That's one my folks had it on that album that I played over and over again when I was younger. There was one question that you just made me think of, and then you got me down the hole of The Sting. Oh, please come back.
Well, while you think of it, I would just add one thing to the podcast question, which is I'm a big sports podcast fan. Again, good material to distract me while I'm running or driving long distance. So it also helps me to keep up with my kids when we're talking about sports because I'm not always watching the games, but through the sports podcast, I can stay current.
I'm a big Mariners fan. I lived in Seattle
Right.
25 years ago when we made our big run. And the coaches of this year's team were some of the players then.
That's right.
So it's been very exciting. I grew up in Colorado, so it's not like I was like ingrained with baseball. We had the
Sure.
Bears, a minor league team, and then that was kind of it. But I'm a big fan too of sports and loving the World Series, headed to the World Series. Michael, it's always a pleasure to be in your presence. Um, I'm just I'm so impressed by who you are as an individual. And I know many others are too. And I appreciate your dedication to the rule of law. I'm not kidding when it says it makes me sleep better at night, knowing that you're in the fight and that you are so smart and know all the levers to pull to stop this madness from overtaking the beautiful country that we live in. So I'm very grateful for you. I'm glad to know that you listen to hip hop. I can kind of see that in your gait now. I can pick that up when you're walking. And I want to thank you for all you do for all the victims of crime here in Boulder County. And I look forward to watching you continue to do that and also seeing what you do next.
Well,
Michael Dougherty, thank you so much.
Marty, thank you so much. I think the world of you. You're an incredible leader. You have fought to make this community better, and you do that every day. And listeners have no idea of how often you pick up the phone and fight for community, and you'll call me and say, this person's in the jail and they're not housed where they should be. What the heck is going on here? And that's on a Saturday or a Sunday, any time of day or night. You're doing that for the community and holding people, including myself, fully accountable and pushing us to do better. And you've pushed me to do better. And I will say just a couple things, if I could touch on,
Please.
for our community. Some of the improvements we've put in place in the justice system. We have events coming up that I just want to highlight. So this Saturday, we're doing a gun safe giveaway. We give out gun safes for free to Boulder County residents because I want to make sure, as district attorney, that we reduce the number of guns being used in needless tragedies, so suicides and homicides. So often it's happening with stolen guns or guns that are being accessed by teens and kids. So this will be the 6th time that our office is participating in a gun safe giveaway. We use grant funding and nonprofit partnerships to raise funds, and we're going to be giving out 400 gun safes on Saturday morning outside the Boulder Rotary Club. And my thanks to the Boulder Rotary Club. They had me present on this issue last year, and now they've raised money to buy gun safes. And on November 15th, we have our Fresh Start Warrant Forgiveness Program.
Love that program.
We launched it in 2019, as you know, shortly after I became DA, and that's for individuals who have outstanding warrants on low-level offenses, so they can clear the case either by pleading guilty or getting it back on the court docket, and they clear the warrant. It also saves law enforcement resources from having to pick people up and take people to the jail. That's why law enforcement strongly supports my Fresh Start Warrant Forgiveness Program. And I'm excited to share with you that now every Metro DA's office does the Fresh Start Warrant Forgiveness Program. So our next one for Boulder County is November 15th. We're actually partnering with Jefferson County. So if people come in and they have warrants in one county or the other, we can clear both on that day, November 15th. So these are some of the things we put in place in Boulder County. I love the work that we do in the district attorney's office. I'm deeply committed to serving community and fighting for justice and the rule of law. And I'm going to continue doing that every day and work as hard as I possibly can. But the reason we've had success is because of community partners and leaders like you, Mardi Moore. So thank you for who you are and what you do.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And thanks to our listeners for joining us for another eye-opening, heartwarming, fun conversation with a leader. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Marty, and have a great day.
Proudly Out of Line is brought to you by Rocky Mountain Equality, with help from your host, Mardi Moore, executive producer, Amy Zuckerman, audio producer, Theo Conover. Until next time,